1991, Axl Rose told Ozzy Osbourne that Black Sabbath was outdated. On a cold December night in 1991, the Sunset Strip glowed like a fever dream. Rain had just stopped, leaving the streets slick and gleaming with neon reflections, blue, red, and gold streaks bending on the wet asphalt like melted memories. From the Rainbow Bar's cracked wooden doors, smoke and laughter spilled out into the night air, mixing with the faint echoes of distant guitars and the endless hum of Los Angeles. Inside, the Rainbow was alive, not with joy, but with ghosts. Every wall carried a memory. Lemmy's corner at the slot machine, where he'd sat night after night. The booth where Zeppelin once plotted tours. The bar where Mötley Crüe started fights and made peace. The air was thick with history, sweat, and whiskey. But that night was different. That night, two worlds were about to collide. The past and the future of rock. And no one who was there would ever forget it. That was the night Ozzy Osbourne, the Voices of Darkness himself, walked back into the Rainbow with fire in his eyes and reckoning in his heart. And across town, Axl Rose, the rebellious crown prince of a new generation, was already on his way to meet him, unknowingly heading toward a night that would change them both forever. Before the story continues, take a breath, because this is more than just a story of rock stars. It's about fear, pride, redemption, and what happens when two storms meet under the same roof. If you live for stories where darkness meets soul, make sure you subscribe to Voices of Darkness, where every tale dives deep into the fire that forged legends. A moment of silence. The narrator lowers tone. The night begins. Ozzy stood under the flickering rainbow sign, his black leather jacket zipped tight against the winter wind. He had walked these streets 1,000 times, from the whiskey-fueled chaos of the 70s to the silent nights of regret in the 80s. But tonight, everything felt heavier. His long black hair, slicked back and rain-specked, framed a face carved by years of survival. The world saw a rock god, but under those tired eyes there lived a man who had fought his own shadow and barely won. He paused at the door. Through the smoky glass, he could already see the familiar glow of the bar lights and the ghosts of memories dancing in amber reflections. He inhaled, slow and deep, like a soldier before a battle. Inside, conversations blurred under the hum of an old Black Sabbath track playing faintly from the jukebox. Paranoid, the song that had once made him immortal, now drifted like a haunting echo from another life. A few regulars turned their heads when Ozzy entered. Some nodded, others just stared, that quiet awe that only true legends commanded. Ozzy ignored them all. He walked to the bar, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. The bartender, a man who'd seen it all, didn't ask questions. "Whiskey," Ozzy said, his voice rough, almost broken. "Double." The glass hit the counter with a sharp clink. He didn't drink yet. He just stared at the amber liquid, watching the light bounce off it like fire trapped in glass. In that reflection, he saw a boy from Birmingham. A boy who once worked in a slaughterhouse, dreaming of escaping the smell of blood and smoke. A boy who never thought he'd change the sound of the world. But he had. Black Sabbath. Iron Man. War Pigs. Paranoid. Those songs had built the foundation of heavy metal. He had screamed the language of rebellion before rebellion even had a name. But now some new kid had called him outdated, said his time was over. The words still burned in his skull. Ozzy's time is over. He should retire. Kids find Paranoid outdated. Axl Rose, leader of Guns N' Roses. A 20-something fireball with eyes like burning gasoline and a voice that could split glass. Ozzy had heard the interview. Everyone had. And it had lit a fuse. He took a sip of whiskey, the burn tracing a familiar path down his throat. For a moment, he closed his eyes. He remembered the first time he heard Welcome to the Jungle. He had nodded in secret admiration. It was raw, dangerous, alive. But admiration was one thing. Disrespect was another, and tonight, that disrespect would be addressed. Outside, engines roared. The door swung open, and a sudden gust of cold air swept through the bar. Conversations stopped. A few heads turned, and there he was, Axl Rose, hair drenched from the drizzle, leather jacket gleaming, eyes sharp as knives. If Ozzy was the storm that had already passed, Axl was the lightning that had just struck. He scanned the room, his expression unreadable. Then his gaze landed on Ozzy, and for a second, The air itself seemed to freeze. The old guard and the new. Two living volcanoes staring each other down. Axl walked to the bar slowly, each step deliberate, the sound of his boots clicking through the silence. "Jack Daniels," he told the bartender without breaking eye contact. The bartender hesitated, looked between the two men, then poured. Axl took his glass, walked to Ozzy's table, and sat across from him. Neither spoke for several long seconds. Finally, Axl broke the silence. "So, I hear you've been looking for me." Ozzy didn't blink. "You could say that. Guess you didn't like what I said." Ozzy leaned forward, his voice low, almost a growl. "What you said wasn't just about me. You disrespected every man who built the stage you're standing on." Axl smirked, swirling his drink. "I just told the truth, old man." Times change. For a moment, the bar was utterly silent, the kind of silence that only comes before an explosion. Then Ozzy's fist came down on the table, the glass rattling. "You think you're the first kid who thought he invented rebellion?" he barked. "When I was your age, I thought the same thing about Zeppelin. About Purple. But I never forgot respect." Axl's smirk faded. His jaw tightened. "Respect is earned, not inherited." The air thickened, like smoke before a fire. Every pair of eyes in the bar was on them. Ozzy rose to his feet. "You listen to me, boy. I was screaming on stage before you were even born. The riffs you're playing came from my blood." Axl stood too. "Then maybe it's time someone else bleeds." The bartender froze mid-motion. A couple of fans near the jukebox whispered nervously. Two generations of rock, standing face to face, and for a moment it seemed like it would end in violence. But then, something shifted. As Ozzy looked into Axl's eyes, he saw not arrogance, but pain. The kind of pain he recognized too well. The pain of a boy who'd spent his whole life fighting to be seen. Fighting to be enough. And suddenly Ozzy's anger faded, replaced by something unexpected. Empathy. He sat back down, his voice softer now. "You remind me of me," he said quietly. Too angry to listen, too scared to admit it. Axl frowned, thrown off balance. "What the hell are you talking about?" Ozzy leaned forward. "You're scared, son. Scared they'll stop cheering. Scared they'll stop believing in you. Scared that maybe one day you'll wake up and realize you're not the loudest voice in the room anymore." Axl didn't respond. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted his glass. "You know what?" Ozzy continued. "I used to think the same about Plant, Page, the guys before me. Thought they were old, done. Then I realized music doesn't die. It just changes hands. And tonight it's still in good hands. Yours." Something cracked inside Axl. The mask of confidence slipped. For a moment he looked like a lost kid from Indiana again, not the world's biggest rock star. "I didn't mean to disrespect you," he murmured. I get scared, man. I don't want to be forgotten." Ozzy smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "You won't be. Not if you keep your heart in the music. Not the fame, not the noise. The music." The tension broke like glass. Axl sat down again, and for the first time, both men laughed, softly, like two exhausted soldiers who had finally found peace. The jukebox coughed and went silent, leaving only the low hum of neon and the occasional clink of a glass being set down. Rain whispered again against the bar's old windows. It sounded almost like an audience still applauding somewhere far away. Ozzy leaned back, exhaling through his nose. The anger that had once burned in his chest began to cool, replaced by something rawer, understanding. He studied the young man across from him, and beneath the cocky posture and wild hair, he saw the exhaustion of someone carrying a mountain on his back. Axl stared into his drink. The gold of the Jack Daniels flickered like firelight across his eyes. "You think I'm scared?" he said finally. "Maybe I am. You spend your whole life trying to be louder than the noise in your own head. Then, the crowd starts chanting your name and you think, maybe the noise is gone. But it isn't. It just gets drowned out by a million voices." Ozzy nodded slowly. "Fame doesn't quiet it, son. It just gives it a microphone." Axl looked up, surprised by the gentleness in that gravel-rough voice. "You ever get tired of carrying it?" Ozzy chuckled, the sound deep and broken. "Every day. You think it's all lights and leather pants, but half the time it's rehab, regrets, and praying your heart holds out for one more encore." A small laugh escaped Axl's throat, but it cracked halfway through. I thought you were bulletproof. Bulletproof? Ozzy's smile twisted. Nah, mate. I just learned to bleed on beat. For the first time that night, Axl smiled, not the smirk from magazine covers, but something real, almost boyish. That's one hell of a line. Yeah, Ozzy said, lifting his glass. But it's not a line. It's a scar. They drank. The silence that followed wasn't awkward anymore. It was sacred, like two priests in a confessional. Around them, the bar slowly returned to life. Someone dropped a coin in the jukebox, and Thin Lizzy's "The Boys Are Back in Town" rumbled softly through the speakers. The bartender, emboldened by the calm, approached cautiously. Everything all right, gentlemen? Ozzy gave a slow nod. Yeah, mate. Everything's finally all right. When the man walked away, Axl glanced toward the back wall lined with framed photos. Black and white faces frozen mid-scream, mid-laugh, mid-life. You ever wonder what happens to all of them after the flash fades? Ozzy followed his gaze. Some burn out, some fade away, and a few, he tapped his chest, learn to live with the ghosts. Do you? Ozzy thought about Sharon, about his kids, about the nights spent staring at a hotel ceiling wondering if the world would be better off without him. Yeah, he whispered, but I make sure the ghosts sing back. Axl's eyes glistened, and he quickly looked down, ashamed of the emotion rising in him. I didn't have a Sharon, he said softly. Didn't have anyone who could pull me out when it got dark. Music was it. That's enough, Ozzy said, if you let it be. You write to survive, don't you? Axl nodded. Every song's a confession. November Rain, Don't Cry. Those are prayers, man. People think I'm dramatic, but it's just me trying to make sense of everything that happened before I ever picked up a mic. Ozzy tilted his head. Tell me. And so Axl did. He talked about Indiana, the small house, the violence, the constant moving. He spoke of his stepfather, of fists and Bible verses that cut deeper than knives, of running through rain-soaked streets with nothing but anger keeping him warm. He spoke until his voice trembled, until the mask fell away completely. Ozzy listened without interrupting. He had heard thousands of stories, but this one was different. The boy across from him wasn't bragging or confessing for pity. He was bleeding truth. And Ozzy, the man once called the Voices of Darkness, felt his own eyes burn. When Axl finally stopped, Ozzy placed a weathered hand on the table between them. The tattoos on his knuckles looked like old hieroglyphs of pain and survival. You... No, he said quietly. I used to pray for someone to listen to, but nobody did. So I screamed, and the world mistook it for entertainment. Axl swallowed hard. Guess we both turned pain into an encore. That's the only trick worth learning. They sat there, 2 generations linked by the same wound. Hours passed. The crowd thinned. Outside, the rain began again, steady and cleansing. Ozzy ordered another round. Not of whiskey this time, but coffee. Even legends had to sober up sometime. You ever think about quitting? Axl asked. Every time I open my eyes, Ozzy said with a grin. But then I remember there's still a riff somewhere in my head that no one's heard yet. I wish I had that faith. Ozzy leaned forward. Then borrow mine. That's what this business should be, passing the flame, not snuffing it out. Axl studied him. So why me? Why bother talking to the kid who disrespected you? Ozzy's laugh rolled through the empty bar. Because you remind me that I'm still alive. Every time a young bastard like you picks up a mic and screams, I know the fire's still burning. It's just moved houses. That line hit Axl harder than he expected. Moved houses, he repeated. That's good. Keep it, Ozzy said. Call it rent for the soul. For the first time, they both laughed openly. No tension, no pride, just relief. The bartender smiled from afar. Even he knew he was witnessing something rare. The clock ticked past 2 a.m. The city outside had quieted, leaving only the rhythmic patter of rain and the faint thrum of an engine idling somewhere on Sunset. Ozzy's gaze drifted toward the door. You married? He asked suddenly. Axl shook his head. Tried once. Didn't end well. Ozzy nodded knowingly. Yeah, it rarely does at first. Takes time to find someone who loves the man, not the myth. Sharon did. She saw the man buried under the makeup and the madness. Saved me when I didn't think I was worth saving. Axl smiled faintly. Guess I'm still looking for that. Stop looking, Ozzy said. Let the right soul find you when you finally stop pretending to be invincible. The words landed heavy. Axl stared at the table for a long while. You talk like a priest. Maybe I am, Ozzy said with a crooked grin. A priest who sinned enough for 100 sermons. By 3 a.m., the rainbow was nearly empty. The bartender wiped the counter, for the 5th time, pretending not to listen as the two men kept talking. Axl was the one who broke the lull. You ever think about how weird it is? We make music to feel free, but it ends up owning us. Ozzy smiled sadly. Freedom's just another kind of cage, but if you fill it with sound, at least it echoes nicely. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled pack of cigarettes and offered one. Axl accepted. They lit up, the glow of their lighters reflecting in the whiskey-stained glasses. Smoke curled between them like the ghost of every concert they'd ever played. For a moment, they were just two silhouettes in a storm of memory. Maybe. Axl said softly. We're not enemies after all. Ozzy exhaled a thin ribbon of smoke. We never were. Just mirrors. At 3:47 a.m., the last call echoed through the room. The bartender flipped the light switches one by one, dimming the world into a soft amber twilight. Ozzy and Axl stood. Well, Axl said, guess I owe you an apology. Ozzy shook his head. You owe me a song. Axl blinked. A song? Yeah. Write one about tonight. About not knowing who you are until you meet yourself in someone else's eyes. Axl laughed quietly. You think anyone'd listen? They will, Ozzy said, sliding on his jacket. Because truth always finds a stage. They walked together to the door. Outside, the rain had stopped again, leaving the street shining like polished steel. Ozzy's car waited at the curb, driver asleep behind the wheel. Axl's motorcycle leaned nearby, its chrome dripping with water. Before parting, Ozzy placed a hand on Axl's shoulder. Remember this night, lad. You don't have to fight every ghost. Some of them are here to teach you. Axl nodded, speechless. The words sank deep, finding a home he didn't know he had. Then Ozzy stepped into his car, the door shut, and the taillights bled into the mist. Axl stood there alone under the rainbow's flickering sign. He looked up at it, the same sign that had watched over decades of sin and salvation, and whispered to no one, "Thank you." But the story didn't end that night. In the days that followed, both men felt a shift. The interview that had started the feud was forgotten. In its place was a quiet respect that spread through the industry like wildfire. Ozzy called Axl a week later, inviting him to his home studio. The call lasted less than a minute. You still owe me that song, Ozzy said, and hung up. Axl showed up 2 days later. Morning crawled into Los Angeles like a hangover. The Sunset Strip, still wet from the night before, steamed beneath the early light. Outside Ozzy Osbourne's house in Hancock Park, a black Harley idled beside a gate crowned with iron bats. The hum of its engine seemed out of place in the quiet neighborhood of movie stars and manicured lawns. Axl Rose killed the ignition. He sat for a moment, helmet in his lap, staring at the mansion beyond the gate. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this, mentorship, friendship, forgiveness. But curiosity burned stronger than pride. He pressed the intercom? Yeah? The voice was unmistakable, half gravel, half mischief. It's Axl. A pause, then a buzz. The gates opened like a secret. Inside, the house smelled of coffee, cigarettes, and something metallic. Studio air. The hallway was lined with platinum records that caught the sunlight like mirrors of old glory. From somewhere deeper came a slow, blues-soaked riff. It was Ozzy, hunched over a Les Paul, lost in a melody that felt half hymn, half confession. He looked up when Axl entered. "You're late, lad," Axl smirked. "Didn't think rock legends kept office hours," Ozzy grinned. "They do when the muse is hanging by a thread." "Come on in." The home studio was a cave of memory. Amps stacked like monuments, mics dangling like old chandeliers, and walls tattooed with notes written in Sharpie. Pain is temporary. Riffs are forever. Ozzy handed Axl a second guitar. "Play me what scares you," Axl frowned. "What?" Whatever you've been running from, that's the only honest song worth writing. Axl hesitated, then struck a single chord, rough, uneven, honest. Ozzy nodded, tapped his foot, added a minor harmony. The sound filled the room like rain on stained glass. In that moment, something shifted. They weren't idle and rival anymore. They were two wounded men building a bridge of noise. Hours passed unnoticed. Ozzy's riffs bled into Axl's lyrics. Axl's screams gave voice to Ozzy's ghosts. Between takes they talked, not about fame, but about fear. Ozzy confessed the terror of relapse. Axl admitted the panic that crawled into his chest before every show. Each confession was answered not with judgment, but with a nod, a laugh or silence, the truest kind of understanding. At dusk, Sharon Osbourne appeared at the door, her smile both weary and warm. "I made sandwiches," she said, placing a tray beside the mixing console. "Try not to burn the house down." Axl looked up shyly. "Thank you, Mrs. Osbourne." "Call me Sharon," she said. "You're the one who finally got him out of his chair." After she left, Ozzy chuckled. "Told you she's the real boss." "She seems incredible," Axl said. "She saved me," Ozzy replied simply. When the world cheered for the myth, she held on to the man. Axl looked away. "Wish I had that." "You will," Ozzy said. "But you'll only find her when you start liking yourself." Days turned into weeks. The sessions became ritual. Some nights they recorded. Other nights they just listened. Sabbath, Zeppelin, Queen, Stones. Ozzy would tell stories between drags of his cigarette. How Iron Man was born from a riff Tony Iommi played by accident. How the first Sabbath record cost less than Axl's leather boots. Axl would answer with his own tales. Riots, canceled shows, the weight of carrying the biggest band in the world on shaking shoulders. Through it all, the line between mentor and student blurred. They teased each other, argued about tempos, swapped memories like battle scars. Ozzy called him the Kid. Axl started calling him the Old Wolf. One night during playback, the tape jammed. Axl cursed. Ozzy laughed so hard he nearly fell off his chair. "Relax, lad," he said, wiping tears. "If a song can't survive a bit of chaos, it ain't rock and roll." That became their motto. Outside the studio, rumors began to swirl, whispers of an unlikely friendship. Magazines speculated. Fans debated, but neither man cared. Inside those walls, they were safe from expectation. They were simply musicians chasing truth. One evening, Ozzy picked up a yellowed notebook. "Got something I never finished," he murmured. "Started it back in '85 when I thought I was done for." He handed it to Axl. The title read, "Ashes Don't Lie." Axl scanned the lyrics, haunting, beautiful lines about resurrection through music. He looked up. "This is brilliant." "Help me finish it," Ozzy said. They worked until sunrise. By dawn, the song had become something new, half Sabbath darkness, half Guns N' Roses fire. When the final note faded, they sat in silence, breathing hard, knowing they'd created something timeless. Ozzy broke the stillness first. "See, lad? Told you music ain't about age. It's about soul," Axl smiled. "Then you've got an immortal one." "And you," Ozzy said, "just found yours." The weeks that followed were lighter. They started meeting outside the studio, motorbike rides along Mulholland, quiet dinners with Sharon, occasional visits to Lemmy's Corner at the Rainbow. Fans would whisper when they walked in together, the old god and the new. One night, back at the Rainbow, Lemmy himself raised a glass. "Didn't think I'd live to see you two in the same booth without police involvement." Ozzy laughed. "Miracles, mate." Axl clinked glasses with him. "Or maybe just music." They drank to that, but even peace needs a crescendo. In the fall of 1992, Axl called Ozzy with a grin audible through the phone. "Got an idea," he said. "LA Forum, next show." "You and me, on stage." Ozzy hesitated. It had been months since he'd faced a stadium crowd. Part of him feared the noise, the lights, the judgment. Yet another part, the part that still dreamed in guitar solos, whispered, "Yes, let's do it," he said finally. Rehearsals were chaos in the best way. The plan was simple. A medley, Crazy Train into Welcome to the Jungle. The idea was impossible, which made it perfect. During run-throughs, Axl kept glancing at Ozzy. The older man looked different now. Steadier, lighter, almost young again. Sharon watched from the wings, smiling as if she already knew what the night would mean. The concert, October 23rd, 1992. The Los Angeles Forum roared like the inside of a volcano. 18,000 people packed shoulder to shoulder, the air thick with sweat and anticipation. Guns N' Roses had just finished November Rain. The stage lights dimmed. The crowd murmured. Then Axl stepped forward, microphone trembling in his hand. "Tonight," he said, "we've got a guest. A man who taught me that rock and roll isn't about age, it's about soul. A man I see as family." The crowd went quiet. Then the lights exploded white. Ozzy Osbourne walked out. For a heartbeat, time stopped. Then the forum erupted, a wall of sound so loud it seemed to shake the rafters. Axl turned, grinning, as Ozzy raised a hand in salute. "Let's make some bloody noise," Ozzy shouted. The first riff of Crazy Train hit like thunder. The band followed, and halfway through the second verse, the rhythm twisted, mutated. Slash slid into the opening lick of Welcome to the Jungle. The transition shouldn't have worked, but it did. It was chaos, beauty, rebellion, history colliding in perfect timing. Ozzy's laughter bled into Axl's scream. Their voices tangled like two generations shaking hands mid-song. Sharon watched from the side, tears streaking her mascara. Even the roadies stood still, realizing they were witnessing more than a performance. It was absolution set to music. When the final note died, the crowd didn't stop. They roared until the lights came up again. Axl turned, wrapped Ozzy in a hug. "Thank you," he whispered into his ear. Ozzy's reply was lost in the noise, but the smile on his face said everything. Backstage, journalists waited, flashes bursting like fireworks. Sharon embraced Axl, her voice breaking. "You gave him back to the world," she said. "He hasn't smiled like that in years." Axl wiped his eyes. "He gave me something too." From that night on, their friendship became legend, not gossip, not rivalry, but proof that even in a world built on ego and noise, respect could still be louder. In the years that followed, they spoke often. Sometimes it was advice, sometimes just silence shared over the phone. When Axl struggled with band turmoil, Ozzy would growl through the receiver. "Ride it out, lad. Storms make better songs." When Ozzy doubted a new record, Axl reminded him, "Music doesn't age, remember?" They never needed thanks. The bond itself was enough. And so the story circles back to that cold December night at the Rainbow, the night anger turned into understanding, rivalry into brotherhood. Two men walked in as strangers and walked out carrying pieces of each other's soul. Low cinematic pause. Because sometimes the greatest battles between true rock stars become the beginning of the deepest friendships. And because music, real music, has never been about who's louder. It's about who listens. If this story moved you, if you believe that behind every scream there's a soul trying to be heard, subscribe to Voices of Darkness. Every week we walk into the shadows of legends and come back with their light. The roar of the forum faded into history, but its echo lived on. Months passed. The tour lights dimmed and the headlines moved on to fresher scandals. Yet for Ozzy Osbourne and Axl Rose, something invisible remained. A quiet pulse between two hearts that had once beaten in rage and now beat in respect. Morning. After the fire, Ozzy woke late the next day, his voice raw, his body aching in familiar ways. Sharon brought him tea, smiling. "You looked happy last night," she said. He grunted. "Felt like I'd come home." Across the city, Axl sat alone in a hotel suite littered with roses sent by fans. The television played footage of the concert, him and Ozzy side by side laughing. He muted it and just stared at the screen. He hadn't seen himself smile like that in years. He picked up the phone, dialed a number he already knew by heart. "Oz?" A cough, a laugh. "Still can't sleep, eh?" "I just wanted to say..." "Thank you. Don't thank me, lad," Ozzy said softly. "Thank the music." Seasons 1993 turned to 94, then 95. The industry shifted. Grunge rose, metal retreated underground. But in studios and green rooms from London to LA, people whispered about that night. Two generations uniting instead of destroying each other. When Ozzy launched Ozzfest in the late 90s, Axl sent a note, "You still owe me rent for the soul." Ozzy framed it on his wall. Sometimes when schedules aligned, they met in small cafes far from the strip. No cameras, no press. Just two men with coffees cooling between them. They talked about songs they'd never write, friends they'd lost, fears that still visited at 3 a.m. One evening, Axl said, "Funny thing, every time a new kid calls me washed up, I think of you." Ozzy laughed so hard people turned to look. "Told you, lad, it's the circle of riffs. Now you're the old wolf." The weight of silence years later, when Sabbath reunited, Axl flew in quietly to watch from the wings. Ozzy spotted him just before Iron Man began, gave a small salute mid-lyric. Backstage afterward, the two hugged without words. There were tears neither would admit to. As time marched on, both men faced their battles again. Illness, public scrutiny, aging in a world that worships youth. But the fear that had once defined them no longer ruled them. Each carried a fragment of the other's strength. Conversations at dawn, a private garden behind a Beverly Hills house. The sun barely a rumor over the hills. Ozzy sat with a blanket over his knees. Axl poured 2 mugs of black coffee. They hadn't met in years, yet it felt like no time had passed. You ever think about the end? Axl asked. Every bloody day, Ozzy said. But I've learned something. Death's just another encore. They laughed quietly. The sound of 2 men who'd outlived their myths. Axl looked at him. Really looked. The lined face. The trembling hands. The eyes still bright. I used to want to be you, he said. And now? Now I just want to be grateful. Ozzy reached over, patted his arm. That's how you know you've made it, lad. The interview a few months later, a journalist asked Ozzy about that long-ago feud. He smiled, a flash of the old mischief. That wasn't a feud, mate. That was a conversation set to feedback. When the same journalist interviewed Axl weeks later, he played the quote. Axl listened, eyes shining. Yeah, he said softly. And I'm still listening. Time, relentless as ever, kept moving. The world changed. Streaming replaced vinyl. Algorithms replaced DJs. But the legend of that December night grew. Younger musicians spoke of it as a myth. 2 gods of noise who chose empathy over ego. In 2019, at a charity event, Ozzy and Axl shared a stage one last time. The song was simple. Knockin' on Heaven's Door. Their voices, rough with age, wove together like weathered threads. When it ended, the crowd stood in reverent silence. Ozzy turned to Axl. Still scared? Axl smiled. Always. But I've learned to sing through it. The final note years later, when illness began to dim Ozzy's touring life, Axl visited him privately. They sat in the same studio where Ashes Don't Lie had been born. The tape machine was silent. Dust motes danced in shafts of afternoon light. Ozzy's hands shook slightly as he reached for the guitar. Still remember it? He asked. Axl nodded, took the second guitar, strummed the old melody. For a moment, time folded in on itself. 1991 and now anger and forgiveness. Youth and age all dissolving into one final harmony. When the last chord faded, Ozzy looked at him. You know, son, none of this was ever about who was right. It was about who kept playing. Axl's voice broke. Then play forever, old wolf, Ozzy laughed. I already am. Epilogue, the rainbow bar still stands. The booth where they first faced each other remains, carved with initials, burnished by decades of spilled whiskey. Tourists take photos, not knowing what happened there. But if you walk in late on a rainy night, you might hear something. An echo of 2 voices, one rough as gravel, one sharp as fire, blending in the hum of old amplifiers. Because legends never really die. They just turn down the volume until the world catches up. And if you ever doubt it, if you ever think your time is over, your song finished, remember that cold December night when pride gave way to understanding, and 2 men found grace in the noise. This is what Voices of Darkness is about. Not fame, not gossip, but the fragile, burning truth behind the legends. So if stories like this move you, if you can still hear the echo of guitars in your chest, subscribe to Voices of Darkness. Join us where every chord tells a story, and every story keeps the fire alive.